Thanks, Len. Welcome, as Len said, to the March 13th, 2024 meeting of the Regional Transportation Advisory Council. Before we dive in today, I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping items. So first, I'll read our notice of non-discrimination. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. You can read the full notice of your rights and protections at www.bostonmpo.org/MPO_non_discrimination. Some guidelines for today's meeting. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. You may mute and unmute yourselves, but please remain muted unless you're actively speaking. And to participate in the discussion, please select the raised hand function. You can find this either by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raised hand button at the bottom, or in the reactions button in the toolbar, and the chair will call on you. And if you're joining us by phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact me, Stella Jordan, via the chat box at sjordan@ctps.org or at 857-702-3675. And just our accessibility statement. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact me, Stella Jordan, of MPO staff at sjordan@ctps.org or by phone at 857-702-3675. And with that, turn it back over to you to kick us off, Len.
Thank you, Stella. So we have a lot of attendees, and as I said, we have a pretty full agenda. So I'm not going to do the intros, but when you speak, if you care to introduce yourself, that'd be great. And if you want to say something about yourself in the chat, welcome that too. So at this point, we're going to turn to see if there are any public comments. If you do have public comments, since we are screen sharing at this point, if you can raise your hand electronically, that would be helpful. All right, I'm not seeing any hands raised. All right, so we'll now move on to the next item on the agenda. Stella, we have a quorum at this point?
Yep.
Okay, great, excellent, thank you. So we'd like to approve the December 13th, 2023 minutes. So if I could get a motion in a second, that'd be great.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for December.
Thank you, AC.
Actually, I had one little change. So
okay,
but I'll second the I'll second the motion. I'll amend the motion. The motion.
Well,
I'll second your amendment.
Well,
do you want me to tell you what my
of course, please.
Changes now?
Yeah, please.
I have to get it back on my phone. When it talks about suggested study ideas, it said that Franny Osmond suggested a study of the corridors that needed attention, and it said the north-south rail. I think I was probably talking about the north-south exploring north-south bus within the region. Like my favorite one I like to point to is Lowell to Framingham.
Oh.
So I know usually when I say the words north-south, I'm probably talking about the north-south rail link, and maybe that whoever was taking the notes thought that, but it could also be that I'm not remembering right. So, but if I had said the word corridor, I don't think I would have been talking about the north-south rail. I think I would have been talking about bus corridors. between the rails, between the rail lines.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, in bringing this up, it makes me really think about the corridor more than the rail link, because I probably heard rail link, even though you said corridor, because we do so much associate you with that
I know.
project, you know.
I do
So
feel strongly.
yeah,
So yes, but usually when I usually most years I do suggest that we study those local transportation or long distance between the RTAs that that suffer from lack of service.
yeah,
So it
everything.
would have been north. You could just change that to north-south bus routes or routes.
Everything north
Give us-
south, right?
Yeah, I mean,
So
we
okay,
can make that
yeah.
clarification for sure.
So with that, with that amendment, I second the.
Oh, I guess,
Yeah.
do I say I'll make a motion to accept the amendment and
Yeah,
vote on the meeting
yeah,
minutes?
you accept the friendly amendment, Franny. This has implicitly seconded it, so we're gonna move on. And yeah, something else, Franny?
Nope.
Okay, great. And so with that, we'll do a roll call to approve the minutes.
All right, Len Diggins,
Yes.
Franny Osmond,
Yes.
Anna Cristina Fregoso.
I actually am gonna abstain. I was not at this meeting.
Okay. John McQueen,
Yes.
John Seward,
Yes.
Skylar Larrabee,
Yes.
Owen McDonald.
Yes.
All right, the motion carries. Thank you all.
All right, great. Yeah, thank you, everybody. So now we'll move on to item 3 on the agenda, and that is review of peer advisory councils made of, so essentially peer entities like us. This is all in preparation for the MOU update. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Stella.
Thank you, Len. Happy to be here talking to you guys about this today. So just to refresh, my name is Stella Jordan. I'm the Public Engagement Program Manager at the MPO, and I'm also the staff liaison to the Advisory Council. Today, I'm just going to talk a little bit, as Len said, about the MPO's process for updating its Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU document, including elements related to the Advisory Council, and then I'll share a review that I've done of peer agencies' advisory councils to support this conversation. So just to get us started, I want to talk a little bit about what the MOU is. So for the MPO, the MOU is the document that outlines the governance structure of our agency and how we engage in our work. It includes the representation included on our board, the MPO's planning and programming process, and other aspects of governance, such as voting roles and committees. And it also outlines the role of the Regional Transportation Advisory Council in the MPO's planning and decision-making process. As you may have heard, the MPO is currently working on an update to our MOU document. This update addresses some feedback that we received from our federal partners during the 2022 Federal Certification Review, which is the process that ensures that we as an MPO are meeting our federal requirements for our work. So that feedback included a variety of recommended updates, one being a suggestion to update language about the Advisory Council. And to undertake this MOU update process, members of the MPO board met as an ad hoc committee to come up with a recommended plan for how various components of the MOU should be updated. That work resulted in the formation of a formal MOU update committee, which Len also sits on. And that committee's work is already underway and will continue through the fall. So right now, we're just focusing on the specific plan for updating language about the Advisory Council. The committee has planned for work on this topic to span from essentially now through at the beginning of June, when we expect the full MPO board to review and vote on proposed updated language. So staff will be working on this over the next couple of months. Today is really just a starting point with the Advisory Council and an opportunity to outline some broader ideas and priorities. And then at our next meeting in April, we'll continue the discussion and review some draft language. And we'll also be coordinating with the MOU committee in the meantime as well. So today, again, I just wanted to take a bit of time to go through what the expectations are for updating language about the advisory council, what I think it would make sense for us to start with, and then I'll also provide some insights, as Len mentioned, from research into peer agencies advisory councils, which I think will give us some good context and ideas as we think about priorities for this update. So to dig into this advisory council piece a bit more, I just want to highlight the specific recommendations that were made by the ad hoc MOU update committee a few months ago. I underlined that the intent here is for this update language to clearly define goals for the advisory council and its role while keeping language about specific mechanisms more vague. You can find the full memo from the ad hoc committee on the MPO calendar under November 30th, and we'll also revisit this as a guiding framework next month when we dig deeper into the specific language. Just to sort of distill that recommendation, the key points that should be considered in the update per the MOU committee are to clarify the role and mission for the advisory council, more clearly outline the relationship between the advisory council and the MPO board and staff, and clearly define goals. Again, the MOU isn't the document for defining specific advisory council logistics. Those are addressed in our bylaws and they can be revisited there and in future updates to the public engagement plan if we so choose. But the MOU, excuse me, is really sort of the higher level document where we can kind of define and frame the mission and role of the advisory council. So based on those parameters, I'd like to frame up this conversation around how this update language can be visionary in terms of the future of the advisory council and establish a clear purpose and mission in relation to the MPO's planning and decision-making process. So my suggestion as we dive into today's conversation is to consider the mission, vision, and goals of the advisory council. And it would be great if we could develop some ideas and priorities for updated language, which again, we'll be discussing at the next meeting in more detail. And finally, before we get into the discussion, I just want to offer one more thing that I think can help inform the conversation and maybe generate some new ideas. So for the past year or so, I've been doing some research on other MPOs engagement strategies, and I've pulled together a body of findings specifically about other agencies' advisory councils. There's a memo posted to today's meeting calendar, which I believe Gia also shared in the chat, which summarizes this research. Essentially, there's a really wide variety in how these other advisory councils are structured and what their roles are in relation to their MPOs. And there's some really interesting examples. I'm not going to go through each example in detail right now, but just to sort of distill some of my key takeaways from all of the examples. First, there were a few common elements that stood out to me and that staff from other MPOs that I spoke to sort of highlighted as contributors to success. These included having a formalized application process for members, the advisory council and staff having really strong collaboration, having a clear outline of the purpose and function of the advisory council, whether that's in an MOU document or elsewhere, and having a framework for impact. So how the advisory council influences the MPO's planning and decision-making process. And then there are also a few common elements that were flagged as being challenging across different advisory councils. These included pitching the value of joining the advisory council and bringing new members on board, maintaining attendance and participation among members, and evaluating the impact of the advisory council's participation, input and feedback on the MPO's plans and decisions. So there's a bit more detail in the memo about how MPOs address these challenges. And overall, I think these key takeaways are really relevant to the conversation about the advisory council's mission, role, and goals that we're about to dive into. So I encourage you to look closely at the examples there as well. And with that context and reference, I guess I'd like to just open it up to you all now. I have a few discussion questions here. What stood out to you from the examples of other advisory councils? What should the mission of this advisory council be? The vision, the key goals? And how can the advisory council meaningfully engage with and impact MPO planning and decision making? So just looking to have an open-ended discussion here and happy to answer any questions from the group as well, but I'll turn it back over to Len to facilitate.
Thank you very much, Stella. So we have until 2:35, we have until 3:15 this conversation. So just raise your hand electronically and I'll call on you. Okay, I'll keep an eye out for hands. And I'll start off. Okay, Anna Christina.
Just really quickly, I was looking at I mean, it seems like our advisory council or the makeup of it seems like it's well attended. Is that true, or do you think it could grow a little bit more?
Is that a question for me or Len?
Well, I think it's probably a question for the group.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, I hate to ask a question with a question, but do you mean well attended with respect to the members that we have, or are you saying that you think the size of the group
Yeah, I mean,
is good?
I'm skimming through this and I'm wondering, like, it seems like their community advisory council, do they have any technical advisors? That's the first one. The second one, there's another one that also appears to be more community led. Do we know if they have any technical people on it or boards? Like, is the is the Society of Civil Engineers, are they present in the majority of these MPOs, or did you not get that granular?
That's a good question. So I guess sort of 2 points on your questions. I think as far as composition, a lot of the advisory councils that I looked at were pretty particularly focused on like community representation. So whether that be from residents, like a diverse variety of residents in the region, or organizational representation from like community-based organizations or advocacy groups. But some MPOs were also a little bit more similar to us, where it was sort of a mix in their advisory councils of more like technical and professional groups being represented, as well as and alongside community-based organizations and municipal stakeholders. And then the other point, so I think, representation is one thing we can think about in the context of maybe getting a little bit more granular after the MOU update as well, when we try to solicit new members. But I think on the subject of attendance and representation at meetings, I would say, our attendance overall this year has been pretty steady. I think there's always room to grow, and I think we've certainly experienced a lot of the challenges that other MPOs cited in both bringing new members on board and then maintaining membership, over months and years. So participation, I think, certainly fluctuates, and I'm hoping that having a conversation about how we can put together like some more goals for our work can maybe help draw people in and keep people in as well.
Oh, thank you.
Great. Thanks. So yeah, I mean, I could go off on or continue along the lines of what Stella was talking about. And I really, in thinking about what we want to be, I mean, and that will help determine what kind of membership we have. I mean, I think of, if at least the agendas that I pull together, I mean, are pretty they're fairly technical, I would say, because a lot of times I'm extending on things that have happened in the board meetings, and I see it as an opportunity for us to discuss some of the presentations in the board meeting more extensively, but also to extend those conversations, and so I don't know how inviting it is to someone who doesn't understand, transportation in the Boston region any more than the board meetings are. Although the public is welcome to participate and give comment, in order to really understand what's going on in those meetings, you really have to do the reading, but also have fairly good understanding of how things work in the region, so that the reading that you do makes sense. So I would say, to the extent that we want to be more inviting to people who know a lot less, then we have to develop some process to create that. And of course, I'm selling the notion of the MPO Academy. But even if we didn't have that, I think we'd have to figure out some way, to help educate people about how Boston Region Transportation works. Or yeah, we have to figure out how to do that, because I would like to think we don't want to give up our voting seat on the board. And if we're going to have that, then we're going to have at least a group of people who really understand what's going on, in Boston, the Boston Region Transportation, in order to participate in those conversations in a meaningful way, and then vote in a responsible way. So there's that. I'll stop at this point and see. Franny?
Yeah, I actually feel like that should be growing more. I sort of count as the height of our usefulness during the time that I've been here, when there were a lot of people attending in person, a lot of people sitting around the room. At one point, it was more low key about who was at the table, and then we started being stricter about, I think we added to the bylaws that you had to attend a certain number of meetings in a row in order to be a member. But it was always a little unclear. So I definitely think being clear about what it means to attend and what it means to be a member. I think in the present state that we're in, it doesn't feel to me like there's a lot of variety or new people coming in to our meetings. We have a few regulars and a few occasionals, but I definitely think we could grow. I also would love to know, like, who's in the room and why, because there's often a lot of staff here, and then sometimes I, as a participant, don't know if someone's here as a staff member, or are they here because they're interested in the topic today, or what. And now I know when we were all sitting around the table in the transportation building, you didn't know that either, but I find it useful to know what people are interested in and why they're here. And yeah, so I would definitely, I'm looking, I'll come back when I have thoughts on the other things, but in answer to Anna Christina's question, I think we definitely would do well to grow.
Thank you, Franny. Anyone else? Okay, I'll ask a question, in that regards the advisory councils, for the MPOs in the state. Stella, did you look at those? My main question is that do they also have voting a seat on their boards?
Are you talking about the other MPOs in Massachusetts?
Yeah, just Massachusetts.
Yeah, so I did take a skim of those in my research, and what I found was that their advisory councils, for the most part, they seemed to be on paper fairly similar in composition and representation to their policy boards. They had similar types of stakeholders, and I think they were less focused on sort of like the public engagement piece. And so my research here was really focused on that side of things, the public engagement, and bringing new people in who aren't necessarily already represented in the MPO's conversations.
Right. Yeah. Okay, great. Because to me, the voting seat, really, I think it focuses, trying to be careful with my words here. It makes me focus on understanding things, to a much greater role than I would if we didn't have the ability to vote, because to me, that's it's a very important responsibility. And then I feel that I need to know what I'm voting on. I need to understand that. I need to be able to justify my vote. And so that to me makes this more of a educational venture, and so that's why a lot of these meetings, are really geared towards like understanding material, and trying to help members understand the material so that I can get meaningful input from you and use that, in terms of making, decisions when it comes to voting. But we can definitely have both. So we keep that voting ability and become educated enough so that we can make good decisions, but also we have the public wing, that is more educational for people who understand very little, and I guess more community based. Yeah, I'll stop at this point because I'm kind of losing my train on this one. Franny?
It's okay. We can go back on and off the tracks here.
Yeah.
I was wondering who we are supposed to advise. I always think of us, an advisory council, advising the MPO, but really we don't have any contact with the MPO as a whole. What we have is contact with staff who do an amazing job at combining and reporting on our conversations and our opinions. And we have the voice of the chair sitting on the MPO. So are we advising Len as to what to bring to the MPO? Are we advising the staff as to what the general outer community's opinion is about processes and things that are going on? Or are we advising the actual MPO, which only happens in a sort of subtle way?
Definitely 1 and 2, and so I, if by virtue of being on the board, and by virtue of being me, I don't know whether the board feels advised by the advisory council. They certainly do hear from the advisory council. Usually a lot of questions, but a lot of times I'll have strong feelings about things. We certainly give advice in our letters, certification. I'm sorry, our 3C committee letters. And so they hear from us that way, and we do interact with staff, and staff gets to see how we are thinking about things, and I think they see us as a sample of the various groups of which we're part, as opposed to being representative of the region, but I'll stop there. So I see John's hand up.
Thanks. I think maybe we should hear from some of the CTPS staff and what they feel they get as whether it's input, advice, and whether it's actually included in or changing or steering any of their planning, whether it's been useful for that. And maybe that would be on the tip, UPWP, LRTP, etc. I mean, how do they feel? I mean, have our comments either helped change or have it improved in their minds any of the plans from where they started before they presented to us?
Well, we could certainly ask them to get back to us on that next time we discuss that. I mean, if anyone wants to speak up now,
they're here.
They're here. I mean, but I can put myself in their position. Go if that question came at me. I wasn't expecting it. I would probably want some time to compose my thoughts. And then get back to us on that. That said, if anyone does want to speak, okay. All right.
I can jump in briefly, Len.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, John, and it definitely gets at like the challenge that we saw from other MPOs about kind of evaluating the impact of the advisory councils. It's definitely not unique to us. I think it's a really hard thing to do. Just in my experience as staff, I think what I tried to do as sort of like the liaison between the rest of staff and the advisory council is bring work with Len, first of all, to see what topics are of interest and what may be timely, but also work with staff to see when in the process of developing plans and projects they would find it helpful to get this body of input. And so, that's why we talk several times during the development of processes like the TIP and UPWP and LRTP. During studies, I think it's valuable to hear reactions at the end. You all were just talking about, hearing presentations after they go to the board, but I think also one thing that I've been trying to do more of this year is bringing folks in a little bit earlier to seek input while studies are still being scoped or while work is underway. I think that's an area that we find really helpful on the staff side. I'm happy if anyone else wants to jump in here, but I can certainly, ask, do a little bit more crowdsourcing and bring that info back to the next meeting. I think, one of the examples that stood out to me was the Delaware Valley RPC's Public Participation Task Force. They sort of framed it as like a focus group for reviewing some of their engagement materials and strategies. And that's certainly a very narrow focus that we don't need to hold ourselves to. But I think thinking about, the input in that way is sort of like staff does find it valuable to hear from sort of a diverse group of people with representing really different interests throughout the region. And so in that way, it is sort of a focus group when we come to you and ask you about the development of different projects and plans. And I think doing so during, multiple stages of the development process is really helpful as well.
All right. I think it'll be awesome. Oh, we have a very special person here, our executive director. And why she's so very special, as you all know, is because she was, the previous chair, of the advisory council. So she really understands, the advisory council from our perspective, but also from the staff's perspective. So Tegan, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, I was really excited to be able to at least hover a bunch in the background for this. I actually don't have to add much. I think Stella said it incredibly well and actually spoke for the staff broadly very well in what she just said. I think in general, Len, when I was in your role working with staff, and now that I'm, overseeing staff that are working with you, I think that the whole reason that the advisory council exists is to be, is to provide that input and to be useful. And that takes work on both sides to ensure that that's the case. It takes work on the board to respect the input of the advisory council through the seat of the chair. It takes work in terms of the staff to work with the chair of the advisory council and the advisory council itself to make sure that we're doing, going through a process that's meaningful for the group that's there. And it also takes the advisory council working with staff to help us kind of build and expand on what we can do with you all. And I do think that a lot of that is also continually captured in not just agenda setting with the group we have now, but also this conversation about representation and what that can look like and should look like as we kind of continue through the years of doing this work. So I feel like I really am just taking up space when Stella really said it really eloquently, but I just wanted to sort of reinforce it from my perspective that Stella has a particular role as a liaison with this group, but I actually think she spoke really well from my perspective as executive director of the staff, and also from my perspective as having been on the advisory board. And John, I think this work is very useful. And also we work hard to ensure that we work with you to make sure that it continues to be very useful.
And I certainly get the feeling that staff listens to us. As I often tell constituents in Arlington, just because we don't do what you recommended doesn't mean we weren't listening to you. It just meant that for whatever reason, we had to do something differently than what you recommend, and so, so we, I think, give a lot of advice, and some of it, we see some changes based on some of it, and sometimes we don't. But I always get the feeling, that people are not only listening to us but taking it seriously. And so, and I feel also the more intelligently you can speak about something, though, it increases the desire on people's part to truly listen to you, take it seriously. And that's why I really focus so much on trying to get us more up to speed on things, and also bringing back the results of the UPWP studies, having people present on those, because we do put a lot of effort into helping to give feedback on the UPWP studies. And I would say everyone on that committee probably recommends a study that doesn't end up chosen, but the studies always, I think, give some interesting results. It's always good for us to hear from them, hear those results as much as possible, because I think that informs our ability to give input on the next universe of studies. And that's probably a nice little segue into the next topic, but we still have 7 minutes, so anyone else want to say anything or ask anything? Yeah, Franny.
I just wanted to say I liked that list. Wait, I saved it on my phone from earlier. I don't know. Can you go back in the slides? Or actually, forget it. I have it in my.
We should go back for everybody else.
I have it saved in my phone. Yeah.
The peer examples.
Yes.
Yeah.
Having trouble seeing it. Oh, there. Okay, thank you. I thought it was important, the evaluating the impact part. I mean, I know it's a challenge, but that's sort of what we're talking about right now. And I have talked in the past about gaining new members, and I'm about to meet with Stella to go through that list of people that used to be on and maybe survey people and maybe figure out, just look at the shape of the council over time and see how it's changed. So all of these spoke to me. They seemed like things either that we had, like strong collaboration with the staff, or things that we really could do. I think the challenges fit us as well as those peers. So it sounds like it was affirming to meet with those or talk to those other peer groups. So I'm comforted by that, and I look forward to sort of moving on all of these, trying to overcome some of those challenges, and also just continue to let people know about the takeaways the things we are doing, because I think those successes are, on the whole, done by us. So anyway, so that was useful. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Franny. And while Tig is still here, put her on the spot a little bit. Do you happen to know how it is at Boston? I mean, that we come to have a voting roll. I mean, if we are really the only one, I mean that makes it very interesting to me how it is that Boston gave its advisory council, a voting roll. I think we're also. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think we're also the only one that's chaired by the transportation department, right? I mean the transportation secretary.
So in the state, all of the MPOs are chaired by MassDOT, the Secretary of Transportation.
Right.
That is what is unique in the country. There's one other MPO, there's a structure in New York where there's like a co-chair that involves the state transportation department. So that is what's unusual. I'm trying to remember back to the reports. There is a mix. There's a broad mix of governance structures where in some cases groups like this do have voting seats.
Alright.
I know we looked at this as part of the MOU research, and I cannot recall if Abby or others in Center for Research looked back to sort of if this group had a voting seat from the beginning or not, but we can look into that and try to get some institutional memory or some knowledge from that. If any of my other staff have any insight into that, please raise your hand, or remember better than I do. But yeah, I mean, I think it is a very powerful statement that this board wants to have this as a seat on their growing board members, their growing set of board members.
Yeah, and you don't have to research it. It's more curiosity, because the reason I say you don't have to is that I don't imagine what you find out would have an impact one way or another. It's more a curiosity question. So if you are curious and you want to find out on your own, that's fine. But please don't consider it like the advisory council needs to know this, by the next meeting or whenever. So
I love curiosity, Len. I'll see if I think somebody knows.
okay.
We'll find
Right.
out.
Yeah, it was probably hiding, with the original MPO, which is hiding with the reassessments, and all other kinds of documents were created back in the 60s and 70s. All righty. Well, folks, it's 3:13. Unless there's another question, we're gonna probably exit this one really soon and give Ethan a little extra time if he wants. Okay, well, this is the very beginning of this. I touched on the notion of MPO Academy, but we'll be back with more information about that. If not in the next meeting, then certainly soon thereafter. All right, so with that, thanks again, Stella, for some great work, and we'll now move on to discussion about the upcoming TIP with Ethan LaPointe.
I think.
I'm sorry, the
Len,
UPWP. I'm sorry,
I think
the
we have to leave.
UPW. Yeah, sorry about that. The UPWP with Mr. Leica. Thank you, Stella.
Yeah, thank you. I'll look forward to continuing the conversation.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm excited to begin our discussion on the federal fiscal year 2025 universe of proposed studies. Next slide, please. One more. So as I think we've talked about before with this group, the universe is looking a little bit different this year than it has in previous years. We received over 100 study ideas through our survey and our fall outreach, which is more than we've ever received. And we really appreciate all the submissions that we received, and we really thank you all for the time you put into your proposals. Staff met about 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point to categorize studies by general topic area. Climate resilience, bicycle pedestrian, freight and transit, and multimodal. We use the criteria listed on the screen to guide our discussion on whether a given study would be A, within the scope of the MPO's work, and B, whether it could be incorporated into an ongoing work program's tasks or as a discrete study. We had a particular focus on discussing discrete studies, which had future implications for program work. So what that all means is we're really looking for proposals that we could either do as part of an ongoing program in federal fiscal year 2025 or in a coming year, or discrete studies that directly related to future MPO work within an ongoing work program. So just to recap, some of those ongoing work programs include bicycle pedestrian support, freight program, climate resilience, air quality, performance-based planning, transportation equity, among a number of others. So next slide, please. So based on our discussion and our initial evaluations, we came up with 23 studies that could be either incorporated into ongoing program work tasks or as a discrete study. The distinction between the two is noted by a pink highlight on proposals that can be incorporated into program work. And I think Gia just dropped a link to the meeting calendar, or to the PDF on the meeting calendar in the chat. Thanks, Gia. So please feel free to reference that through this discussion. Next slide, please. So to zoom out a little bit, the MPO's goal is to fully fund its ongoing programs, to support continuous MPO work, and to ensure that staff are able to respond to ongoing needs and emerging trends, such as those that we often hear through our discrete study outreach, without necessarily the limitations of like a 1-year fixed study. The amount available for discrete studies in federal fiscal year 2025 is not yet known, but we are projecting that it will be limited and it will be similar to that of FFY 2024, which it was $150,000. So again, the point I would just want to emphasize here is that we are really looking for study ideas that we can incorporate into our work long term, not just kind of in a one-off capacity. So that framing is what we used when we were going through and evaluating the study ideas we received. Next slide, please. So with that, I will ask you all to begin discussing these study ideas in front of you today. Given the limited amount of time we have for this agenda item, and we've got a packed agenda, I'm not going to be able to go through every single study idea one by one, even though we only have 23. They're all very robust ideas, so I don't think we'll necessarily have time to go through line by line, but I'm happy to answer kind of high-level questions. And I'm looking forward to discussing or hearing about your priorities based on what is in the universe this year. We have a couple staff available, I think, to answer questions, but yeah, generally, I don't know that and I'll defer to the chair and Stella on this bit. We have time to go line by line.
Oh, no, not line by line.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Okay. So.
Yeah, so looking ahead, I am hoping to present the draft federal fiscal year 2025 UPWP in May to both the advisory council, to the committee, and board for a release for a 21-day public comment period. And I think every year the advisory council provides a comment letter, so that is just kind of the timeline that we're working with. And I'm looking to present the document for endorsement by the end of June. So we'll look to get a comment letter by like mid-May, early June, if that's possible. So I'll turn it back to the chair. And yeah, looking forward to your discussion.
Thank you, Shalika. AC, that hand goes up really fast. Happy to see it. What do you want to say?
Just a really quick question. Are we going to do a matrix and put
I
it
can
in one
barely
sheet?
hear you. Can barely hear you.
Oh, that's because I have my
Okay. all right.
microphone up.
Okay.
Just really quickly, are we going to do a matrix of which ones we really like and then kind of whittle down from there again? Because I'd like to read these a little bit in detail and I don't want to rush anyone.
Well, Shalika can talk to how she plans to survey, the board, and then she's going to survey us, separately, or whether we come up with our own survey. But I just want to emphasize that this is like just the beginning. We're going to discuss this some more next month. So there'll be more time for input from the council. Shalika?
I think just for the sake of time, it may be best for the advisory council to kind of come up with their own ranked list. I'm not sure if I'm on the agenda for next month, and I'm just not sure about the timelines of having a survey sent out. But I'm happy to also, pull up the universe so we can share the screen and kind of scroll through it. But I'm not sure that we're planning on doing the survey of the advisory council this year.
Okay. But you are going to do a survey of the board, right? Or no, I'm sorry. You're going to do a survey of the UPWP committee, or you're just right?
Right, the committee,
yeah.
that like ranking survey. Yeah.
Right. So do you have a sense of when you're going to do that?
Not yet.
All right.
Yeah, not yet.
Because we could just piggyback on that, what I mean? If you create that, then we just like also send the same survey to the advisory council, and then we just do our own. And then we're like a subset, and so we do our own like ranking, and then that becomes like the input of the advisory council into the UPWP's ranking. Did that make sense?
think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna talk to Stella about how we want to approach
Okay.
that survey, just because I don't know exactly when I'm gonna send out the ranking survey to the committee.
Okay,
I
all right,
think if I could just jump in quickly, one
sure.
thought I had is I think in the past 2 years we've tried to do surveys and we've gotten really low response rates from advisory council members. I know there's a lot going on
Yeah,
and it's kind of hard to
right,
do something outside of a meeting like
yeah,
that. So
right,
we're really hoping to use the time in the meeting to talk about priorities that then, we as staff and also you, Len, can take back to the committee for their
right,
discussion.
right. That's true. I mean, yeah, I hear you, okay, all right, we'll talk about it some more, so in order of hands, I see Franny and then John.
To help me decide, which ones I would rank how, I would love to hear either from the applicants or the recommender or the staff at some point of their impressions, like this one is really important because of this. This one is very similar to one we did a few years ago and that had this kind of results, or some kind of sort of qualitative input on them to sort of give us, an elevator pitch or whatever. I mean, I know that in some ways that's and I am looking at the right, I'm looking at the universe of proposed discrete and program-based studies, right? This is
Right,
the right
yeah.
place. Okay. I know, the summaries are that in a way, but it just would be helpful to have the emotional contribution from staff and applicants.
Right. We can get a little bit more of a taste of that if you either come to or watch the UPWP committee meetings, because at least staff is there. And sometimes, the non-staff um, um, recommenders or proponents are there. I should say sometimes. Maybe I should say rarely, but certainly staff is there. And to the extent that, Shaleka is involved in selecting the universe, then I think she could give some insights as to why it was important enough, to make it into the universe. And then certainly when we've selected studies out of the universe, to propose, that's like a subset of the universe, and that's when the discussion gets pretty intense. So like I say, check out the recordings, and certainly, feel free to ask me to repeat what I heard or discussed, during the meetings, so.
And one other thing to Franny's point as well, sorry to jump in here,
That's
but
fine.
if you look at the far right column in the universe that was posted to the calendar, there is a staff comments column, and there's not comments on every single idea, but this reflected some conversations that were had internally about what you were saying, Franny, to your point, like what overlaps with other ideas, what might we consider possible versus, maybe a little bit of a harder sell given our capacity, things like that.
Thank you, Gisela. John?
Yeah, I think to Franny's point, I believe it was paying a little more attention, I guess, to the comments on the side. Perhaps those could be a bit more evaluative in terms of how they're going to impact the various studies. I saw a couple where I think it was relating to the bike share study, which was A4, and it kind of bled into the roadway and multimodal. Are those going to be combined? They probably should be, to get a broader sense of multimodal mobility. Plus, I think we ought to revisit perhaps, and maybe you did in the committee, but again, there were some ideas last year that I think were high level that didn't quite make it in terms of I think it was yours, Len, the regional fair transit and service integration. That would be a good component for perhaps further understanding the opportunities for transit to develop and become more important in a mode. Also, that might include the parameters and the combination of that are significant to make an impact on transit usage, the combination of those. That was sort of touched on, I think, by a couple, but not really. And then I think in terms of the resiliency, there could be a little bit more room for comment or addition, perhaps, from people presenting ideas, maybe from the advisory council, because that seems like it could stand a little bit more of a listing of potential ideas. That's a very critical aspect to really start studying, get ahead of it, and perhaps drawing from some best practices or potential practices to start dealing with solutions, making them actionable. But anyway, I'm looking forward to us, the advisory council, presenting some of our ideas for real consideration. I think last year we didn't really, or the last 2 years, you probably didn't have a lot of inputs from the advisory council because, quite honestly, we didn't really have we probably had half as many people active in the membership at the meetings as we used to have maybe 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, when we used to sit around a table. You look at who's here online right now, and we used to have at least double that. So we just the sheer numbers, you didn't have as many people to opine on some of these. But anyway, looking forward to it. Saw a few that were some pretty good insightful things. I think that the budget constraints really kind of limit some of the ones from consideration. If working with $150,000, some of these are, as last year, way too broad, way too all-encompassing, and they were missing. They identified some issues and appropriate gaps, but really didn't deal with how they would be measured and how the research would be conducted. So I think that was a gap for any serious consideration as to its viability. Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I'm going to come to you for just a couple of comments, what John said. And so yeah, the budget is a constraint, and we don't know how much the studies cost. That's always the situation. We just never know, how much these studies are going to cost. Until I think when we're getting pretty deep into maybe a meeting or two before we're getting ready to choose the final studies, and in terms of suggesting more ideas. So the staff did come to us, several times this year, and maybe even started in late last year, to start soliciting ideas from us. And so we did have opportunity to put some ideas in. I think your question now is, now that we've seen the universe, maybe we feel that there's some inadequacies in the universe. Is it possible for us to add anything to the universe? And so there's that question. And then if the question answers yes, then how quickly can you mobilize to put an idea in? Because I don't think this council is going to get together within the next 2 weeks to do something formally. So it'd be just a matter of whether members on their own can add something. So Shalika, it's fine if the answer is no, but I'm just going to pose that question to you. Is the universe set?
Yeah, I would say it's going to be really hard for us to add any at this point, especially
Okay.
looking at the kind of like raw universe that we received this year, since we got like 120 something responses.
Yeah.
I will vouch for at least our staff and note that I will reassure you that we did go through all of those like line by line, and really did evaluate whether they would be a good fit for a program, whether we had the staff capacity to do it, whether this was something that that was even feasible for us to be able to scope as work, as a study or within a work program. So beyond that conversation, I'm not sure it's necessarily feasible for us to go back and, basically meet with staff again, have a meeting, add those studies in time for the next kind of committee meeting, which is going to be next week. Yeah,
Gotcha.
I don't really think I need to
So,
take time.
and just, I'm sorry for one more. So you said that you did look at the studies from last year to determine whether or not they should go into, is that what I heard you say?
No, what I said
Okay,
was we
okay.
went through all of the responses
Okay.
that we received this
All
year.
right, all right.
So yeah.
All right, okay, but none of it's from the previous year. Okay, Franny, thanks for your patience.
Oh, no problem.
Right.
I was wanting to understand, and sort of what you're saying now maybe helps me understand it, where the suggestions that we just approved in the minutes that we gave in December went. It's like, were they considered before this list came up, or was that for other kinds of studies? In the minutes, I just went back to the minutes. I thought we were giving study ideas. Were they part of those 100-something that you whittled down for various reasons?
I'm not sure. So as I think we've said in previous years, like we really appreciate these conversations, but to be able to evaluate something, we do need like an input into our survey. And that is really for tracking purposes. That's so we know, who submitted it and we can, follow up with them if we need any clarification. So,
Son of a bitch.
well, there was, like a lot of
John,
conversation here.
Stuart, you need to turn off your microphone. Thank you. So go ahead. Sorry. Sorry
Well,
about that.
No, it's totally fine. We really appreciated that conversation in this group, but to be able to effectively evaluate a proposal, we kind of need that input. And I believe from that conversation, a couple advisory council members did submit some ideas that we were able to evaluate. But in general, if it's just kind of conversation, it's hard for us to kind of pull out a proposal from that.
Because over the years, it's like every year I'm always suggesting that we participate in looking at north-south bus corridor between the east-west rail lines. For example, between Framingham and Lowell, because there are so many workplaces along there and housing developments and places and shopping areas that people from both ends can really benefit from having transportation for. And I've always wanted it to be looked at, which brings me to the sort of curiosity. Occasionally, I've seen studies that CTPS does. And how do those studies differ from UPWP studies? So my question is it pointless for me to suggest that kind of study year after year? Or
so there's a difference between discrete studies and contract work that CTPS as an agency might do for some of our partner agencies such as MassDOT or the MBTA. So discrete studies are things that staff do internally, and again, these are a bit more theoretical, exploratory, with implications for program work. So an example is the study from last year, applying Conveil to TIP project scoring. This is a study where staff are really exploring the use of the software and how we could use it in our ongoing program work. So that is typically the kind of study that we are looking for, something that has direct implications for our ongoing programs.
wait, that discrete is the ones, are you saying that the universal proposed studies is discrete studies?
Right, they're
Okay.
called
They're called
we
discrete
discuss them as discrete studies.
Okay, I mean, things like, I think it was Rob Cahill once did a study of for CTPS of Acton transportation needs or something like, this is many years ago, it was like 2006. But that kind of study where, is that different from this? And what are those called if not discrete studies? Specific
I'm not
area
familiar
studies.
with with the study you're talking about, 2006.
Okay, that's just like one of many, okay.
That was
Franny,
likely
for
a
the-
community technical
Yeah.
assistance study, which is another category of studies that are
that are
Okay.
studies where towns basically either hire us or we use some amount of our own funding to do hyper local studies. Yeah,
Ah.
for either a specific corridor or a specific problem or intersection.
Okay, so which area, this idea of studying the need and the feasibility of north-south bus travel between Framingham area, between Metro West RTA and Lowell RTA, say, as just as an example, where would that be best looked at? What kind of study is that?
That probably fits best within a proposal for a discrete study, like what we're talking about, like a UPWP study.
Okay,
Because we
okay.
don't have a program that would neatly fit inside. But it is sort of like a combination, like technical policy type of study. Now, that doesn't get at any of the issues of whether like it's at the scale of something we can do, whether we have the right skills on staff to be able to do it, whether there is a complete enough proposal to be able to evaluate a suggestion like that. But like thematically, it would fit into that category.
Okay, so instead of just saying it at the December meeting, should I have filled out myself the survey and given more information?
Yes, yeah,
Affirmative.
that is kind of what we need.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I think I haven't been utilizing my agency.
Yeah. And
Okay,
we'll try to make it clear to me that we were trying to empower members through those meetings that we talked about in the UPWP when they're soliciting ideas for the members to propose their own studies, because that happened last year. I think John did and I did, that we as a committee were not going to propose any formal ideas, because there is a structure to them that helps, where you make the case, you say what the study will do, and then you tell what the outcomes will be, the products, and another type of study that we have, which is one reason I think that we have fewer funds, for discrete studies, is that we do have like corridor studies, and I don't know if they're called major infrastructure, major intersection studies, and so every year we'll have at least one, maybe two studies that are presented to the board, that are done by CTPS, and they are these major corridors. And so it used to be that we would see those in the universe, but it would be like, well, these are the studies we're going to do, or we'll do one or two of those, but it's not really for the committee to decide on, because staff needs to determine the resources that it has in order to pick a study, if it was choosing amongst those, or if they were already determined, so I just put it out there. I think those are called programs, and so because we commit to doing those studies, it leaves less money, meaning that we see as available, but in essence, if one of those studies was going to cost, let's say $75,000, it was disingenuous to say, well, we have $225,000 and to spend, because 75 of that was coming out for that program. And so now I think staff is just realistic about how much we really get to pick, and that's 150K worth of studies. So John, you had your hand up. Do you still want to say something, McQueen?
No, not really. I just, it doesn't really sound as though beyond today that we have much of a role except to just listen. So it's in terms of any meaningful inputs to the process and what might be considered. So anyway,
Well,
thank you for covering it.
yeah, well, no, you can talk about any studies that you want at this point, and certainly you can tell me your thoughts after the meeting, and before the next one or two UPWP meetings. I will take your input and use that, when I discuss things, at the meetings. So feel free to send me an email, even ask me to have a conversation with you, any of you. But if there's a study that is appealing to you now, or you have some questions about it because you want to know more before passing judgment on it, now's a good time to do that. And if you want more time, then let's say you can get back to me, but also some subset of these studies will be chosen to move into consideration, for the final selection. So to the extent you study up on them, it won't be in vain because you'll get to weigh in, at the next meeting as we discuss, where we are in the selection of studies. And I will bring some kind of a survey to you, whether I created on my own, or the staff helps me create it. You're going to get to rank the studies in the universe, and that will guide my input. Either I will just say, here is the advisory council's ranking of them, just take it as it is, or I'll say, these has helped me, determine which ones I want to advocate for. So it's not going to be your only chance, okay, John, and everybody else. All right. Anything else?
Well, I think we should note Andrew's comment in the thing. And before I note that, I would say that I'm confused, and you do not have to clarify it with me now, whether that kind of program study, corridor studies that you mentioned, Len,
Yeah,
is a third category, not the discrete studies and not the technical assistance. But don't get into it now. I just want to say that it's still unclear to me. But Andrew said, I'm uncomfortable as an outsider mentioning it, but $150,000, you're not an outsider. And 121 projects seems like a mismatch.
well,
And is it 121 or is it, well, it was 121, right? And you whittled it down to like 23?
So yeah,
Yeah.
we received
Yeah.
about 121 like submissions to our survey and like through our outreach, and we whittled it down to 23 study ideas that we are considering.
Well, I guess it's really a function of how much outreach you do. And so the more outreach you do, generally you're going to get more input. And so and that decreases the percentage that will be selected. The did less then it would increase the percentage that's selected. I think the real point though, and it's a point that I share, is that I wish we had more money to do more studies too. And I understand the rationale of the staff. So there is research that's being done. We just get to choose fewer of them. And I would say if there's an opportunity, to do more studies, I think we would leap at it. From the perspective, well, from the coming from just having more money, and then more staff, in order to do the studies, but yeah, point well taken, Andrew. So I was so with respect to, I know you said you didn't want an answer now, but we have 10 more minutes, and I do want, if Shalika or Sean want to comment on the corridor studies, just to make sure that I convey things correctly. That those are programs, and those are a different type of study group, correct?
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
They're both housed within our multimodal team.
Yeah.
And there is separate funding for corridor intersection studies, which are studies that are hyperlocal, that are either identified by past staff planning work or requests for assistance that come from municipalities, or for the community technical assistance. A lot of those requests come via outreach that MAPC does. And we call them all studies, but when we say discrete studies, we mean like sort of either things that range from policy or combination policy and technical studies that have their own budget. That's kind of what the discrete refers to, is like the discrete budget for that individual study, whereas community technical assistance and corridor studies are programs that have their own budgets. And then often those projects aren't selected until well into the federal fiscal year, but discrete studies are budgeted before the year even starts, and those priorities are determined, you know, in the next couple of months.
So if I were to try to, again, to get this corridor looked at, that sort of north-south Metro West travel corridor, what is the route to that?
So I guess there would be two ways. It would be through proposing a discrete UPWP study, or through working with some of the municipalities along that corridor to approach the MPO for technical assistance with studying that issue.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
And so, and next year I can try harder to get the group or support individuals who want to make proposals. I just didn't have any like good ideas. That's why I didn't propose anything. And I was kind of busy, but I just felt I didn't have a compelling idea this time. And I was like, let's see what the universe gives. I mean, I'm sure there'll be lots of good things in there for us to choose among. So that's all I have to say on that. Anyone else? Anything else? It's okay if we run ahead of schedule. We blocked out 2 hours just in case we needed it. I figured it'd be better to let people go early than to keep them too long. So we're going to move along then to the next topic after expressing our appreciation to Juleka, and Stella and or I will be in touch with you for next steps that we can take before the next
Thank you.
council meeting. Yeah. All right.
Sure.
Okay, take care. So next on the agenda is Ethan LaPointe to talk to us about upcoming tip or update on it, the readiness update.
Yeah, thank you, Len, and thanks everybody for coming here today. My name is Ethan LaPointe. I am the Transportation Improvement Program Manager with the Boston Region MPO. As Len mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, this is going to be a fairly brief update, but there will be a lot of information covered here, so my focus is on providing time for discussion. So it may seem like I'm going through the slides fairly quickly. So just to go on to the next slide, as part of today's presentation, there is what we are calling our readiness scenario for the federal fiscal years 25-29 TIP, which is posted on the calendar for this RTAC meeting. What this scenario reflects are some results of all of the different changes I'm going to be running through in this presentation. Each project that was delayed based on the coloring has a red colored cell. Any project that is either at high risk has a red color of text in the far left columns, or if their funding is flagged as red, that may either reflect a delay, a cost increase, or both. And orange reflects a moderate risk project that may move from its start date. With that out of the way, if we go on to the next.
Can you repeat what the red in the left side, the shaded red means?
So a shade of red on text is reflecting a risk of delay, not necessarily a change in the start year. A shade of the cell that text is in reflects an actual delay of the project.
Thanks.
So if we go on to the next slide and the one after, there's a couple disclaimers here. The first being, this is what we call the readiness scenario because it is the foundation upon which all other TIP scenarios are built upon. The tomorrow's TIP process readiness and engagement committee meeting is already going to be making adjustments to the figures that I will be presenting here today to try to address what we are seeing on screen right here. So this is factoring in most of the delays, cost, and inflation changes on all projects programmed in the TIP for regional target dollars. It does not factor in any of the new projects or any new information that we're going to be getting over the next few weeks. So I'll break this down so it's a little bit more visible starting on the next slide, because we have different situations in each of the 5 years of the TIP. In the first 2 years of the TIP, federal fiscal year 25 and 6, there is a very large amount of unprogrammed funding. Those who have attended these meetings in recent years may recall that this is not the first time that the TIP has had a lot of money in the first couple of years. The reason why this happens is generally because of a very high volume of delays across projects that the MPO is funding. To put a number on that, there were only 3 projects in federal fiscal year 2025 that were not delayed. Overall, 16 projects in the TIP were recommended for delay, and that was out of 28 projects total. So that is a majority of projects in the TIP have been delayed in this cycle. Many of those projects that were in fiscal 25 or 6 were either delayed 1 year or even more delayed into federal fiscal years 27 or 8, a 2 or in one case 3-year delay. What that shows is that we began with our readiness scenarios before we get into actual programming with a surplus of about 72.6 million in 2025 and a surplus of 34.67 million in 2026. That might sound good, but if we go on to the next slide, the punchline to that is that because of all the delays getting kind of log jammed into 2027 and 8, there were significant deficits in that year, basically to the same degree for each. Federal fiscal year 27 has a negative $80.869 million deficit, and federal fiscal year 28 has a $26.04 million deficit. What that has basically meant is that for any of the new projects that I discussed at the last RTAC meeting that were being evaluated for scoring, those projects will all likely be funded in federal fiscal year 2029, with the exception of one very small project in federal fiscal year 26 that has a cost of about 1.8 million and can very neatly fit in. I should mention, this does not factor in all of the community connections projects, which are in a separate pool of funding and are not directly impacted by these financial changes. So if we go on the next slide, we can show all of this up in a line. Basically, because of a combination of delays in federal fiscal year 25 and 6, and most of those delays moving into federal fiscal years 27 and 8, we have a very large amount of surplus in the first 2 years, not a lot of projects to utilize it, and then the middle 2 years, we then have a very severe deficit. In the final year of the TIP, federal fiscal year 2029, you may notice that despite being a new year of the TIP, with $161 million ostensibly available, that funding is only at an availability of about $51.2 million. The reason for that is because in addition to any projects that may have been delayed out of federal fiscal year 28 into 29, there are also projects that have a very high cost associated with them and are funded by the MPO across multiple federal fiscal years. These are projects like McGrath Highway in Somerville, Rutherford Avenue in Boston, and Western Avenue in Lynn. I should also note that part of the resolution that we are looking to perform for the deficit in federal fiscal year 28 is to take some projects that are entirely funded in 2028 and partially fund them in 29, alleviating some of that deficit in federal fiscal year 28 and reducing the program amount in 29 accordingly to try to resolve that. With that said, as I mentioned earlier, if we go on the next slide, overall, these are the results of seeing about 16 projects recommended for delay, and we are also anticipating that further adjustments to the schedules for projects or potential deprogramming of projects may be undertaken in order to address that very serious fiscal constraint issue, particularly in federal fiscal year 2027. With a negative $80 million deficit in that year, one, that is not only a large amount in and of itself, but two, the fact that there is a deficit in the subsequent year means that the traditional lever of delaying projects out until there's fiscal capacity to support them is not available. There are also 8 projects that are at risk of further delay. What at risk of delay means is that it might not be realized in this TIP cycle, but if certain permitting requirements are not met by the project over the next year, when we get to the federal fiscal years 26 and 30 TIP, this time in 2025, we might be looking at more delays there. There are also 13 projects on that list, some of them overlapping with the delay projects, that saw cost increases above 10%. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that while we use 10% as a threshold, there were numerous projects that saw cost increases above 50% among that list. There's a lot of overlap between those projects that saw delays and cost increases. Namely, a lot of projects that saw delays had not had an update to their project schedule since a few years ago, often 2021. Accordingly, a project that may not have seen a design update since 2021 likely had not seen a cost update since 2021. And given inflation over the past few years, many of those projects also saw cost increases to that degree I just mentioned, ranging anywhere from 50% up to a high amount of 120% in the case of one project, though that project was fairly small in scale. So some key considerations here, because I know I'm going through a lot of information. Next slide, please. One, this is a snapshot and items and changes are developing. I can tell you that those numbers I just listed off with regard to the deficits and surpluses are much less now if one were to look at the preliminary scenario that is on the MPO calendar for tomorrow's TIP Readiness Committee meeting versus what I am showing you here today. We are actively taking strategies to try to minimize the amount of surplus and, most importantly, eliminate the deficit in those years. One, we need to make sure that we have surpluses of funding across all TIP years, not only for project contingency, but fiscal constraint must be demonstrated in the TIP, which means that there can be no excess programming amount relative to our funding availability. I should also mention that within the Boston Region MPO and our 97 cities and towns, we are not alone in this. Every other MPO in the Commonwealth is facing these same issues, and some of them are not only seeing the same issues we're seeing on the cost side and the delay side, but the extent to which these cost increases are hitting their programs is leading to much more adverse effects overall. There are certain MPOs, for example, that have projects that are $15 million, climbing to about $40 million, and that one project represents the totality of their 5-year plan. We are fortunate that that is not the case here. And again, given that this is also happening to the statewide program, there are strategies being made and coordinated between each of the other MPOs. And we are also working very closely, not only with our partners at MassDOT, but also at our regional transit authorities and the MBTA as well, to try to identify some options for projects. So on the next slide, here's some reasons why we think projects are going to be delayed. First off, most of those 16 projects that I mentioned that were delayed were recommended because they were struggling to submit either right-of-way plans and or environmental permitting for their projects, or there were design permitting issues for things like intersection safety control. Right-of-way in particular is one of the casualties of a lot of staff turnover at the local level, as the right-of-way process is a very complex legal process that requires that kind of institutional knowledge locally in order to navigate. Many municipalities as well, if they have a larger scale project, likely require more easements and more right-of-way takings if they are looking to implement things like an off-road shared use path than if we were just talking about simple roadway resurfacing projects. Federal funding is also not often used for right-of-way acquisition because it induces additional permitting requirements, and that means that there's more local dollars spent on right-of-way. If there are increased costs to acquire right-of-way, that means there are increased costs borne by the municipality, which may also entail further involvement in town meeting, not only to appropriate funds, but to vote to approve those takings as well. We also, on the next slide, have observed that many projects are struggling to meet design submission deadlines, which can include right-of-way submissions, but there's also other elements, including the need to revise the kinds of plans that are submitted in there. We've also observed that with COVID, some design consultants have varying degrees of capacity and also different levels of familiarity with MassDOT requirements. Recently, for example, there have been a couple of design consultants that have started working in Massachusetts who may have formerly operated only in other areas of New England because of increased volumes of projects being delivered under the bipartisan infrastructure law. We're also seeing that because design costs are traditionally borne at the local level, and therefore require town meeting approval, just as with right-of-way, that can often lead to a delay of projects. Town meetings are often not held whenever the project is ready. Inversely, town meeting is there to accommodate, or I should say, the project must accommodate the schedule of the town meeting itself. Projects are also not, to say, grandfathered in if design or permitting requirements change or increase as the project navigates its life cycle. I mentioned intersection control evaluations just now. That is one example of a new one. If there are new stormwater requirements that are being put in on a project, utility analysis work, different coordination with things like telecom providers, all of that will tend to delay a project even further along. So while right-of-way was the consistent theme, it was by no means the only theme. And if we can go on to the next slide, the elephant in the room, which people hear about all the time, is cost increasing. So the obvious item is that inflation on unit prices for materials has led to a significant amount of increase in cost. And very often, if a project has a slow design timeline and it's missing deadlines on design submissions, it's going to have an older cost estimate. Those projects that I mentioned that saw those double-digit percentage increases almost all had cost estimates from 2019 and early 2020. So while it is a percentage cost increase reflected in this tip of about 70%, what we're really looking at is about 4 years of inflation coming to roost on the project, in addition to any other kinds of needs that have been identified to be addressed in the project over that time. Also, any additional permitting needs that might come up in a project may require an increase or an adjustment to the project scope, which tends to increase costs. For example, we have a project in federal fiscal year 2025 of the tip right now, where utility coordination and soil disposal alone account for about $7 million of a $10 million cost increase. And then, of course, the other factor to consider is that if you have a project that is frequently getting delayed, the longer it takes to address that project, especially with a New England winter coming in every single year, the worse the condition of those assets is going to get. And that means more money required to pay to do those repairs. So not only do you have inflation hitting, but you also need to do more intensive work to address that repair need. So some key considerations on the next slide. As I mentioned earlier, if we can just jump to the next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I may have misspoke. This is the problem with having too much text on a slide. So given the fiscal constraint issues in federal fiscal year 2027, there is a very strong likelihood that the MPO will be looking to deprogram projects from the federal fiscal year's 27 part of the TIP. That discussion will likely start happening tomorrow at the TIP Process Readiness and Engagement Committee meeting at 1 p.m., but that discussion will be had over multiple meetings over these next few weeks. Deprogram projects are not projects that are disqualified from applying to the TIP. Rather, they are taken off the TIP today, and they may reapply in future TIP cycles if there is design progress being made on the project, or if any of the near-term issues on that project are being resolved. Given the fact that this has happened over multiple TIP cycles, as it was observed in the federal fiscal years 23-27, and most recently the 24-28 TIP development cycles, we're also expecting that these challenges are going to persist, not only as we develop this TIP, but as we move into the next TIP, as more projects are progressing their designs. We are currently implementing strategies to try to control costs on projects and also provide design funding for municipalities to navigate this kind of challenge. But it will take time to realize the benefits of those policies. And in the nearer term, we're still going to have some issues to work through as we develop future TIPs as well. So as I mentioned, we have some upcoming dates on the next slide. So for a refresher, on March 7th, MPO staff presented our MPO board with finalized project scores and descriptions for board members. Tomorrow at the TIP Process Readiness and Engagement Committee, the TIP committee will be discussing scenario strategies and priorities. Namely, how should the fiscal deficit in federal fiscal year 27 be addressed, and how should design funding in federal fiscal year 2025 be handled, given the surplus in that year. There will not be a voting action taken on those recommendations and strategy development until March 21st, which is when MPO board members will discuss and vote on preliminary project scenarios. Based on that discussion and vote, we'll then return to our TIP committee on March 28th to refine those recommendations and try to incorporate member priorities and any commentary from the public. We are looking to have a final list of projects selected and a final TIP scenario on April 4th. So with that was a lot of information, and I do in later slides have a line-by-line item of each of the projects that saw delays. But if we go on the next slide, I'd be happy to field any questions folks have.
So quick question, Ethan. So when is the TIP going to be released for comment?
So with regards to the letter, the TIP will be released for public comment on April 18th.
Okay, that's what I was operating on. So I was just that last one kind of confused me a little bit, but okay, just making sure that I was operating on the right information. Okay, great, thank you. Franny?
Yeah, I wouldn't know where to give advice on any of this, but I do think that it shows that, especially for towns who can't afford or have lost staff, it would be so important for either the Boston MPO or the MAPC to assist at these times where they're lacking. I mean, and make sure that it's, we look around at which towns really are suffering those losses.
All right, thank you, Franny. Anyone else?
I have
Yeah.
a really quick question.
Oh, you're very faint again, AC.
Yes, I'm sorry, the mic
yeah.
is.
All right.
I had a very quick question as far as the 2007 fiscal constraint that you're going to be deprogramming. Is that accounting for the loss of revenue from public transit?
That does not factor in any other state sources, as this is solely related to funding, federal funding availability through
Okay.
our regional target program. While I mentioned that MassDOT is seeing similar impacts, the changes that we are proposing for this tip only reflect the regional target program the MPO has.
My questions, of course, are going to either be answered tomorrow at the Tipper meeting, or I'll get to ask them at that meeting. I got to tell you, I'm happy that committee exists because at the way we're meeting, you kind of wonder how we manage without it, huh? So yeah, we got our work cut out for us over the next few weeks, So. And just in case Ethan leaves right after this and before my comments, Ethan's presentation at the meeting on the 7th was quite the tour de force, and it was really impressive. Ethan, I mean, I commented on it at the meeting, but what I'll add now is that list that you rattled off at the end about how all the ways you're going to pretty much help us look at the cost benefit analysis was really impressive. And it was only with the greatest self-control that I didn't raise my hand to say, wow, just wow. So I look forward to seeing all of those additional metrics that you're going to provide, to help us see what we're getting for our money, with these various projects. So thank you. Thank you very much. All righty. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, a thumbs up for AC. Okay. We will move on. And the next is 3C committee planning. So you heard the timeline from Ethan, and Stella and I had talked, and it seems like we will not need an extra advisory council meeting in order to approve our letter. The timing is such that I think we'll be ready to vote on our letter the day before the final comments are due. So with that, we just need to plan on when we're going to have the 3C committee meeting. And I'm thinking it could be either on the 22nd of April if we stick with Wednesdays, or the 20. Hold on. Let me think. The 22nd is actually Monday, so it'd be the 24th of April, or the 3rd of May. What's that first Wednesday in May? Let me look at the calendar. It should be the 1st. So probably May 1st. So either we could just do that as a 3C committee, or if all of the advisory council wants to have the ability to weigh in on the creation of the letter, we could just have an extra advisory council meeting. So just think about that. We will certainly choose a date at our April council meeting, but instead of springing that on you at that meeting, I'm springing it on you now, so it won't be such a surprise, and a must be, and hopefully some of you will give some consideration to either being on committee or at least helping us choose the date at which we as a council will meet to start putting together a comment letter on the tip. The project has been selected for the tip. Franny.
Yeah, I would like to urge some of the members who are here to step forward. I think I shouldn't be on the 3C committee because I always feel like I'm over my head. I'm really trying to do something that I'm actually not, the word isn't eligible, but it's not my background. And so I would love not to be on it this year, and I would love if some people would step up and work on the 3C committee.
I think I'm on the 3C committee, am I not?
You
Oh,
were?
yes,
And
you,
were-
well, no, we don't assume that people who were on it last year are gonna be on it this year, so we always ask people if they wanna be on it in a given year, you know? And I gotta tell you, my inclination is just to have another advisory council meeting. And of course, you don't have to show up. You don't have to show up to any meeting for that matter. But it wouldn't be like it wouldn't be like we are going to have an agenda in addition to working on that letter. And so at that point, it's like anyone can show up. You can make comments. And those of us who are taking responsibility for crafting the letter will go ahead and then craft the letter. So if we publicize it as a public meeting, then anyone can attend. Usually the reason for having a subset of us is so that we can meet without publicizing the meetings. We still do, but it's not a requirement, that we do so. And certainly the subset of us that are on the 3C committee can have meetings outside of any publicized meeting, get our work done. And so that would be a way of kind of having our cake, meaning the 3Cs committee gets to do its work, and eat it too, meaning that other people can then chime in and give us some advice as to how to work on that letter, what to include on that letter, so that when you're voting on it on the 8th of May, it won't be the first time you're seeing it. At least you might be seeing the letter for the first time, but you'll have a good handle of the components of the letter. So, all right, preliminary discussion on this. We'll be having a discussion again at our April meeting. Okay, and so with that, I'll move on to the chair's report, and that was pretty much it. We talked about at the last board meeting. We also
So why
talked
don't I call
about
you back?
Franny. We can hear you. For some reason we can hear you. See your
I
microphone is
pressed
out.
that for a second by accident.
Okay, no problem. So we looked at a MBTA. Let me just pull up my notes here. Oh, so it was the transit asset management performance targets for the MBTA, which are important, but still not nearly as exciting as Ethan's presentation on projects that are in the universe, for the tip. And so if you have the time and desire, I just suggest that you go and look at that part of the recording. If not, you can certainly see the PDF for those projects, in the materials for that meeting, and there's also a PDF with the scores. So that's going to be it for the chair's report. With that, I think we're ready to close this thing up, and could have done it in 105 minutes, but it was nice to have that buffer. Okay, so I'll look for any member items at this point. I'm not seeing any hands, so if I could get a motion to adjourn in a second.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I'll say a motion to adjourn from Anna Christina Moscosa and second by Franny Osmond. We are adjourned, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you
Bye.
in a month, 4
Thank
weeks.
you all.
Thank you.